It's not. Is it working?
God, I hate this system. Hey, everybody. It is Daniel and Tiffany here from the Wish You Were a Beer Show. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you're unfamiliar with us, this is a weekly beer review show. We do it every Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern here. It streams live through Facebook and the app formerly known as Twitter. But obviously you can find us here on YouTube as well. We thank everybody for stopping by. If you're unfamiliar with us, please, down at the bottom of the screen is all of our social medias. That's where we spend a lot of time during the week. So make sure you stop by on our Instagram. Make sure you check us out on TikTok. Really big on TikTok.
Blowing up on TikTok.
Yeah, the kids love beer. So make sure you check us out there as well. At the top of the screen is our website, wishyouwereabeershow.com. If you want to find a complete catalog of our past episodes, what we have coming up, some of our beer blogs, obviously
our merch. Yeah.
Obviously the merch.
The merch is really where it's at. There's a lot of really good t-shirts in there.
Merch
a lot of them relate to episodes. You could watch the episode while wearing the shirt, and it's like the coolest inside joke.
Boy, that is a big
no one else
jump.
Will get.
That is a big jump.
I'm really setting them up.
Yeah, obviously for failure.
I don't think so.
I think
you
so.
wearing one of our shirts.
If you're unfamiliar with us, I'm Daniel. This is Tiffany. We normally have our third co-host on the show, Phil, but he was fortunate enough to be traveling and to make me have to do the technical end of things.
Which is
so I hope Phil gets to watch the show eventually, and I hope it's really smooth and it's the most viewed episode. If we could do that, that'd be great.
Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. But as always, like we do every week, we do want to start off with a quick little piece of beer news.
Yes.
All right.
Welcome to beer news.
One slide down. I'm already killing it. So this is a portion of the show that we do every week. We're just going to take a quick second to discuss something that's happening within the realm of craft beer or beer adjacent sometimes. And I found a really quick, easy story this week because we do have a guest on the show with us tonight. So I wanted to get through beer news quickly. But Narragansett, I don't know if you're familiar with the old Narragansett 30 racks. If you went to college, there's a good chance you are familiar with them.
Well, in the East Coast.
And the East Coast in general, yeah. They teamed up with Bing Crosby's estate and made a beer.
They made White Christmas Winter Warmer.
Yes. I'm really upset because when I read the story, I was like, oh my God, where can I find this?
Yeah.
It's only in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So if you are in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, please go source this beer out.
Send it to us.
Send us a message. I will send you Tiffany's personal address. I'm not going to tell you where I live because that's
weird.
What? But yeah, if you can find this beer,
you're going to just put my address.
It sounded amazing. It had like cherries and orange zest. It's like a 7.5%, which is great, especially for a winter beer. So
yes.
Again, Narragansett, Bing Crosby, you can't go wrong. But
and the can art is awesome, and I collect beer labels. So again, if you find some,
yes, please let us know.
That would be amazing.
This is why I can't have money though, because if I was Narragansett, that's what I'd be doing. I'm like, hey, I'm gonna team up with the nation's most revered crooner or his estate and only produce this beer in 2 states. Good luck.
I feel like that's really mean.
Yeah, I know,
but you could be better.
But I have money, so that's why I would do that.
Well, thank goodness. Thank goodness we're here.
Thank God.
Trying to sell merch.
This is true. This is true. I don't know what that means, Vero. I don't speak Spanish. Andrew got a big merch drop last week. It means
that she's here.
Oh,
I think no, because it'd be a key.
I don't speak Spanish.
Know. Maybe I don't speak English either.
I know that person. Good luck out there.
Hello, Wayne.
Oh, listen, Santa Cruz.
Hey, Mom.
Don't make it sound like she's just like a normal person. God, you can't just be throwing that out there.
No, it's fine. My mother supports me, and that's cool.
Also, our good friend Dave is here. Not to say hello to us. He wanted to say hello to Vero. But if you're unfamiliar with Dave runs a podcast called Beer in Front. And if you didn't get his last episode, he also did a cider for the holidays episode where he had a couple of his friends from Chicago on to talk about cider. It was really well done. So if you haven't had the chance to check that out, again, Beer in Front, cider for the holidays, really solid.
Yes.
Vero, I speak the truth. I know what the truth means, I think. sometimes. All right. So again, I wanted to blow through beer news. It was just kind of a short, quick story because we do have a guest on the show with us tonight. We've got Posterity Ciderworks on with us tonight, and we're going to be doing technically our first cider on this show.
Yes, we have not done a cider on the show.
Correct.
Before.
We have had ciders.
Correct. I enjoy ciders.
Yes. I'm pretty sure you know where to find me. It's
best show so far.
Check out my OnlyFans. I'm listed as Tech Guy.
I just love that everyone is saying hello to my mother.
That's fantastic. Now, so we're doing our first cider on the show tonight, and if you follow along with us, this is actually a cidery that we got to have involved in our wedding as well. So pretty exciting for us. Again, it's Posterity Ciderworks. I'm going to find this next segment that I'm supposed to already be doing while I'm talking. We have a special guest, which is your cue, Brendan.
We've got to change that.
We got to change that slide. Brendan, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Doing well, doing well. So now, where are you guys located? Because we had a conversation about how to pronounce the name of the town, and I think we were both wrong.
We really like to just start things off as hard as possible. We're in Mokelumne Hill, which very few people know where that is. It's about 550 people who live in the town.
Nice.
We're in the Sierra Foothills, rough location. We're about an hour east of Stockton, Sacramento, Lodi.
Sacktown. I don't know where any of that is. So
you have been to Sacramento. Do not lie. Yes, I was gonna try and say the name of like your town when we were doing the promo, and I was like, nope.
No.
Yeah. No, we like to make it's memorable, but it's also hard.
Yes. Yeah. Most things that are memorable are difficult.
Stop it.
Okay, I was gonna say difficult. So no, I'm excited for this one. Again, we're going to do this early because this is a gigantic bottle that I love. So again, we are having a cider tonight. This one is called Marriage Tree. It's from Posterity Ciderworks out of a town in California that is at the Sierra Foothills. All right, good. I'm going to let Tiffany open that now because I'm terrible at this. So, Brendan, this is always a big question for me, especially on this show, because we do so many beers and so many beer adjacent things. Where did you get started in cider? Where's the draw for you?
Honestly, the same way that a lot of craft brewers get started. It started as a hobby. We were living in Half Moon Bay. We had this cute little place, and the big draw was that house had about a dozen mature apple and pear trees. It was this gorgeous garden. The house needed some work. And then, you get your first crop off of a dozen apple and pear trees and you're like, oh my God, what on earth am I supposed to do with this? I have 300 to 400 pounds of apples a year. I didn't really plan for that. The natural segue from there was, let's start making some cider. Let's see where this goes. And a lot of the stuff that I made at the beginning was actively terrible, which I'm sure is also the case for many home brewers and formerly home brewer craft brewers. And I really started getting more into the weeds because we had this resource, we had all this fruit, and it was so disappointing to me to have it coming out as a product I didn't want. Like it was a drink that I didn't want to drink. And that's a problem. So I just started getting more and more in the weeds. And what I found is that a lot of the conventional wisdom about how to make cider is honestly not super great. And you really have to kind of go back. A lot of cider that gets made in this country doesn't really have the same production tradition that beers or cider does overseas. And a lot of people will point to Prohibition as being the end of the American cider industry. It's really not the case. It definitely was for craft beer, where you had this huge reduction in the number of breweries. A lot of styles were lost and then slowly rediscovered. The same thing is really happening with cider now, but the roots go back a little bit further. And it really started with urbanization, when people moved away from farms where they were producing their own ciders, which was the go-to American beverage for a long time. And they started moving into cities, and they weren't living on farms. They weren't growing apple trees. They didn't have a barn where you could just leave a couple barrels of juice to ferment. And so it started probably 30 to 50 years before Prohibition is when the American cider movement really started to shift and fade. And so that kind of just makes it a little bit harder to recover, I think, than beer was. And a lot of brewers can look overseas. And similarly, I looked at some of the French cider making traditions and English style. And then I started borrowing from winemaking techniques, and I started going down the rabbit hole of like Belgian beers and yeast strain cultivation and a lot of the more farmhouse styles. And it was just like this incredible rabbit hole that took over my brain. And eventually I made some stuff that was good enough that Kris, my wife, said that I wasn't totally insane. It was actually, and that kind of started the road to opening the doors here.
Very cool. So now what's the significance of the name? Where does Posterity come from? Posterity Ciderworks.
Yeah, there's a couple layers to that one. So the first off, a lot of what we harvest these days is old abandoned orchards up here in the Sierra Foothills. In some cases that go back literally to 1860. We found trees that were planted that long ago that are still cropping. And they were planted really as a resource for multiple generations to be able to benefit from. And so that's one layer. Another layer is really what we're trying to do, which is a lot of when we find these old orchards, a lot of them are growing varieties that have essentially been lost at the commercial level. And we're able to take cuttings, plant them in our orchard, and kind of bring them back in a certain way. And then we also find wild trees that we can experiment with and try to create, landrace apple varieties that are, say, native to the foothills that are good for hard cider. And then the other side of it is the style of cultivation that we do in our orchard, which is very, very different from the modern, more mass market grocery style cultivation of fruit, which is more high density, high input, high yield per acre, but it's also much more churn and burn and unsustainable. And so what we're planting on our orchard is trees that will take a little bit longer to grow. They'll bear for a lot longer, though, and they're also going to reach more of a homeostasis with their environment. They won't need us to pump out the aquifer and supply tons of artificial nitrogen the way more commercial grocery orchards these days are typically planted.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that Kris sent us as well, was how different your process is versus some of these mass-produced ciders. So, when you go get an Angry Orchard, it's going to be a little bit different. And I only say Angry Orchard because I think that's a brand that at least everyone is familiar with at this given juncture. But obviously, to produce it at that level, they're going to be using a different process than you guys are using to get your apples, to process your apples, the fermentation process.
Exactly. Yeah. And honestly, cider is just like beer. There's a huge spectrum of styles, and there's a huge spectrum of producers. And so we're definitely on the opposite end of the spectrum from mass market, market saturated brands that you've definitely heard of. And so a lot of what we do takes longer to get from fruit to bottle. In some cases can take us 2 to 3 years. It's much more similar to a wine in that regard, or, some of the well-aged beers where they need that time to bottle condition or time in the barrel to gain character for secondary, slower metabolic yeast processes and things to kind of kick in and produce flavors that you can't get when you're going from start a fermentation to can in 30 days, which is what a lot of the more mass market brands are doing. They're not starting with fresh apples. They're starting with juice concentrate. They're diluting it, fermenting it as aggressively as possible, clarifying it, back sweetening it, adding any chemical flavors that they want, pasteurizing it, and then canning it. And so that's just a totally different process. It's a different product in the end.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely I'm like listening to how you guys are doing it, and it sounds super cool.
Dumb question. What is a wild apple tree, you say?
That is not a dumb question at all. That is like my bread and butter, in fact.
Yeah.
So like every apple variety that you see at the grocery store that has a name is a clone. It started from a seed at some point, decades to centuries ago. Somebody planted a seed. It turned into a tree. Somebody ate the fruit off that tree and said, hey, this is really good. Let's call this Granny Smith. And the downside of that apple being super, super good is that apples don't breed true. So all of the seeds from that original first Granny Smith apple tree are going to grow up and become totally different flavored apples. And so the only way to get that same apple is to take a cutting. So you take a section of wood, vegetative material off of that tree, you graft it onto another tree, the wound heals, and then that little branch grows and becomes a branch or a whole tree that produces Granny Smith apples again. So a wild apple is, say, that Granny Smith was planted next to a Gala apple or a Fuji. Again, like imagine just standard grocery store varieties that you've heard of, not the weird stuff that I deal with. And they crossbreed when they're both blooming at the same time. Pollen from one gets on the flowers from the other, fertilizes the seeds, then you get an apple down the road, 7-8 months later. And when that apple tree drops that apple, those seeds are going to become different trees again. And that, if you grow it out, is going to be a wild apple. And typically what we find in a lot of these old orchards that we harvest, they've been abandoned for a long time. They're typically, we're talking like 60, 80 years since anybody's even lived on the property. And you can imagine like everybody but people is eating those apples, like raccoons and skunks and bear and deer. They're spreading those seeds. And so if we're really lucky, those seeds found a good spot to grow. They found some water and they've been able to survive and grow and turn into a tree that's giving us wild fruit. And the reason that that's really interesting to me is that typically the more crosses and the more feral, the more wild that apple gets from those original planted named cultivars that started as a clone, the more often they're going to start to be reflecting cider properties and characteristics that we might want. And so what I like to say a lot of the time is that making good cider is very similar to making good wine. It starts with the fruit. And if you want to make a good cider the way I want to make my ciders, it's just like wine. You're not going to go down to the grocery store and get 20,000 pounds of seedless green grapes and expect a really nice white wine to come out of that.
Yeah.
Most of the grocery store varieties that have those names that you've heard of, the 7 or 8 varieties that are in every store, they just don't have the tannin levels, the aromatics, the acid is wrong, the sugar level is wrong for making the kind of ciders that I want to make. And so the fun thing with that crazy, weird apple genetics is that you start with an orchard that was originally growing those dessert fruit, not cider apples. You crossbreed it for 60 or 80 years, you get wild fruit, and sometimes that wild fruit has amazing properties for cider.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that also makes it a little hard to plan for what you want to do if you're trying to make something. But
Totally
this is actually going to be my next question. Are your wild apples, are they smaller or bigger than what you normally find in a grocery store?
It totally depends. So a lot of the time, I will say they're typically smaller, and it's not necessarily because they're wild. It'll be, these are commercial varieties. Say something like a wine sap. It's been around for a while. You've probably seen it at a farmer's market. But because they're abandoned, they're not getting any irrigation during the summer. So we have, we're Sierra Foothills. We can have summer temperatures over 110, no rain for 5 or 6 months. There's less water in the fruit. The fruit's going to be smaller. But other times, if they have, they're growing near a creek, they found some of their own water source, there's a spring on the property, something like that, they're going to look just like a normal apple that you would find at the store. They're going to be the same size. They're going to be juicy. And it can really depend both on the variety and the site. Where is it growing? What resources did it have?
And 2 pounds of grapes, a Ziploc bag, some bread, and a toilet.
Somebody's
been to prison.
So how do you get access to all these wild apple trees?
Yeah, you just tromping around.
Like, are you just asking people like, hey, it looks like you have an apple tree?
Totally. All of the above. We've had a couple pieces in the local paper. We've got good word of mouth at this point. We've had our doors open for about 18 months. We've been working with some of these families and ranches and farms now for, I think this is a 4th year that we've been working with a few of them. And yeah, the other side of it is literally just driving around, usually during either winter when the fruit is still hanging and the leaves have started to drop, or springtime when stuff is blooming. And again, like you see it on the side of the road, this just huge tree, big pop of blossoms. You're like, oh, there's a pear tree back there. There's like 10 apple trees. We got to figure out who owns that property. And so it can take some time. So sometimes it's literally just like nobody's lived there in decades. We leave a note in like a Ziploc bag on a ranch gate because somebody's clearly been grazing the property. So like a lot of the time what happens is that the commercial apple market collapsed in like the 1950s, and the varieties that had value totally changed. So a lot of these orchards were abandoned about then because the family couldn't make any money. So they started doing other stuff. The trees are still there, and now they just rent that land to ranchers to run cattle. And so we can tell if it looks like the property's been grazed. Maybe we leave a note at the feed store and we're like, hey, you know who's running cattle out there? Could you give them our number? And then we talk to them and we're like, hey, who are you renting the land from? I want to know if I can get access to those trees. Other times we talk to neighbors. Everything we can.
That's awesome. It's like a Easter egg hunt, but it's an apple hunt.
It's super, super fun. When it finally comes through and it's like 18 months since we first saw the tree, I've almost forgotten the property. And then we just get a call out of the blue and they're like, hey, I heard you want some apples. Come on out. It's just awesome.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I know you kind of hit on it a little bit earlier of just, the difference of how you make cider versus others. But what is the main difference between cider and beer from a brewing standpoint?
Like an actual brew, because we talked so much about how a beer has been brewed on this show.
Right. But we know that like malts and cereals.
Do you know?
Yes. And you're using apples, so it's flavor wise can be different, but is the process the same?
So the process is significantly different. So for beer, your sugar source is coming from malted grain that's boiled to extract the sugars. In cider making, at least the style that we do, heat is the enemy. Because if you boil fresh pressed juice, you're going to lose a lot of subtle aromatics to that vapor. And there are styles of cider that do rely on that, where you boil the cider for a long time, you drive off some of the water, you're going to concentrate the sugar, and you can ferment it that way. But in general, you're going to lose a lot of the more subtle varietal specific characteristics. It's also, as brewers know, just really time consuming and expensive to heat up a ton of liquid. And so we have the advantage in that, much like wine, there's no boil for us. So we take the fruit, we bring it in from the orchard, we give it a rinse, we sort it again. We usually sort in the orchard, so we don't want to be taking bad apples home. And then good advice for everyone.
Tell me about it.
So we bring it back to the cidery. We're going to rinse and sort it a second time. We're going to grind it. So we have what's called a fruit mill or an apple mill. And it's a big, big garbage disposal made for chewing up fruit. And it comes out, looks something like dry, uncooked applesauce, chunky. Depending on the variety that we're pressing, it's going to be either more like sawdust or more like that really liquidy, wet applesauce. And then from there, it goes into our presses. So this is where we squeeze the fruit, the crushed fruit, and we have perforated screens, basically. And the screens have little holes that let the juice run through, but they're going to hold the solids back. And so that's basically where we're separating the liquid that we want. The must is what that's called in winemaking, kind of like the wort. That's the sugar-filled, freshly pressed juice that hasn't begun fermentation yet. So in winemaking, that's called the must. And we're separating that from the pomace. Pomace is not pumice, which is the rock, but pomace. That's the starchy, fibrous, like worst fruit leather you've ever had that's left behind when you get most of the water and sugar out. And so from there, it goes into our fermenters. And then the process is probably a little bit more similar to what people in the beer world are used to, where either we're going to let the native yeast, the wild yeast that's living on the fruit, take over and do the fermentation, or we're going to pitch a commercial strain of yeast in there and let it begin. And that really comes down to the varietal and more specifically the orchard that we're harvesting it from. We do a lot of native yeast fermentations, and that's part of our... So back up. Our production philosophy is kind of goes under the heading of low intervention. And you'll hear that with winemaking as a movement. Not so much with beer making, but the similar version might be like mixed culture brewing, things like that, where you are letting the wild stuff and the character of what you're using, the state-based, terroir-based ingredients that you're using, have a bigger say. And so we're not pitching like really aggressively. We're not adding yeast nutrient. We're not going to add clarifiers or fining agents. We're not temperature controlling our fermentations. We use the wild stuff whenever we can. And there are times when we can't. We know that like this orchard, the microflora that lives there, it sucks. It's not worth using. It produces bad flavors.
You still got to make a good product regardless.
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of like, there's varying schools in the like low intervention or natural wine. And so like the lowest intervention is just letting the fruit rot on the ground, not touching it. We're obviously not doing that. We're steering it, but we want to try to express as honestly as possible the character of that fruit that we're working with whenever we can. And so part of that is that we don't use sulfites in any of our ciders either. The sulfite is there to basically pasteurize that freshly pressed must. It's a form of sulfur, and it's basically a powder that you sprinkle in. It's in the vast majority of wines and ciders that are on the market. And it basically replaces that wort boil where you are pasteurizing your beer. In cider, if you're not heating it, you're not driving off those volatiles, you're using sulfite to control those wild yeasts, bacterias, spoilage organisms. And so we, as part of low intervention, forego the use of all sulfites. And for me, that's primarily just a sensory and aesthetic thing. The sensory threshold for sulfite is actually fairly low. It's basically exactly the same as the minimum effective dose. It's like 50 parts per million is where your nose and your palate are going to start to pick it up. And so the moment you use it, you're creating sulfur as a flavor and as an aromatic component in your cider. And so the reason most people don't pick it out is that it's in the vast majority. It's in like 99.999% of wines and ciders. It's
right. Yeah. You probably don't even notice it at that point.
Exactly. Your palate has been trained to just see that as a normal cider or wine flavor, but it's actually sulfur. And so we don't use any. And again, that's part of that low intervention. So at any rate, at some point we've got the wild yeast or we've got the cultivated strains that we've selected. They're eating the sugar. They're producing alcohol and CO2, just like in a beer. We've got blow off tubes. It's very similar at that point. And we're going to let the fermentation run its course.
Now, Josh asked, do you use any true wild yeast? So like when you think about brewing, there's people like doing open air cool ships for their fermenting processes.
Yeah. So again, we have it easier when we want to use wild yeast than brewers do, because brewers have to boil the wort. And so the wild yeast that might have been living on that grain or might be in the air of their brewery, it got sterilized. So if you want to do a wild yeast or a native fermentation with a beer, you do have to do that initial uncovered period. For us, it's just living on the fruit. We're never sterilizing it. It's always there.
Interesting.
When you're fermenting, do you use like stainless steel like breweries, or do you using like oak barrels?
We use a variety of vessels. Yeah. So we use oak, we use stainless steel a lot. We even use plastic carboys and tanks from time to time for different things. It really depends on what that cider is going to be, how much oxygen we want to let it see. If we want to bring out flavors from oak, and sometimes we'll move back and forth. Like we'll start a ferment in stainless and then we'll move it to oak and then we'll move it back to stainless and then we'll bottle it. It can totally vary.
Interesting. And so Katie wants to know, can you use cans or does it have to be bottled?
So for the style that we do, when we do our sparkling ciders, we do a secondary ferment inside the bottle. And so you can't easily do that inside a can. I know a few breweries have figured it out, but it's time consuming and expensive. And it's also harder to age in cans. So like I said, a lot of our ciders, it's going to be like a year-long fermentation and aging period. Then it's going to go into the bottle and it's going to sit there for another, 6 to 18 to 24 months. You can't do that in a can. But so that actually is a great segue to bottling. So the fermentation is going to run its course. Sometimes we'll bottle while it's still in primary. That's a style that's called pétillant naturel. And that's where usually 3 to 5% of the sugar is going to finish fermenting inside the bottle and give us natural bubbles. That's what pétillant naturel means in French. And the sugar source is going to be the original fruit pressing. Other times we'll let the cider finish. We'll let it clarify, gain some character from time on lees, rack it, whatever we're doing, move it to oak or back to stainless, whatever we're doing. And then at some point down the road, we'll reintroduce sugar, either from the next year's pressing. So a new vintage of fruit we'll add in, or we'll add honey or just sugar to get those bubbles in, bottle it, and again, carbonate naturally.
Yeah, it almost seems a little bit like a weird food or age process like we think about in beer. Like Yeah, throw this in, and then
Yep.
we'll bring next year's into it as well. We'll
Yep.
reintroduce this to it.
And the yeast is already in the foeder itself from the
Right.
wood soaking it up. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about this one specifically because we did have this at our wedding because you guys were amazing enough to send this to us. But let's talk about this marriage tree variation because I love this is my favorite. I was reading the back of the bottle. Notes: bittersweet apple, vanilla, rich oak. That's it. I've never read a canned beer that has less than 10 options there. So that
or that it's like, it uses this malt, it uses this hop, and so you're
Right.
like, okay, we're gonna have like these 8 different flavors kind of competing with each other. Yeah, the fact that this one has just a few is amazing.
So tell us about Marriage Tree. Obviously, it comes from a story from y'all as well, you and your wife.
Yeah, so my wife and I got married under a big giant oak tree, actually not too far from where you guys got married.
Nice.
We got married at Quail Hollow, so like 4
Yay.
miles away. And so for our first oaked aged cider, we were just trying to figure out names, and we wound up settling on Marriage Tree. And it's a really beautiful marriage of the oak flavors and the apple. You're gonna get the oak like right up front, that kind of warm, round, toasty oak and spice. A lot of nice mouthfeel, and then the finish is this nicely layered, subtly tart, bittersweet apple. And full apple flavor. It's going to be dry. All of our ciders, just also to delineate from a lot of ciders that you might have at the grocery store, all of our ciders are fermented naturally dry, but that's going to have a range of expressions. We get stuff that's like super brute, really, really dry and cottony. And then we've got stuff that's like this, where it almost feels like there are sweet notes in there. Mm-hmm. There's just no actual sugar. What you're tasting is full fruitiness. And I see you shaking.
No, that's crazy because I remember even when we had at the wedding, I remember thinking like, man, I had like 2-3 of them. And normally if I drink like a lot of sugary things like that in some capacity, sometimes mead does that with me as well. I'm like, man, I just feel I'm not hungover, but bloated and shitty.
Sugar hangover.
Yeah. Sugar hangovers are real. And like a lot of them, the sugar levels can honestly creep pretty high. A lot of them are close to a soda in terms of how much sugar is in there. That's a lot for your body to take in, especially when you're also adding alcohol into that.
Yeah, especially when all you do is drink alcohol.
But I felt great. I felt great the next day. I don't know. We must have been really good at hydrating. So
I think we did. We did okay.
Yeah, I felt totally fine the next day.
So now, how many apples does it normally take to make one of these bottles, or can you even quantify that, or like a full batch?
It honestly depends on the apple, but as a rule of thumb, I usually say it takes about 13 pounds of apples to make a gallon of juice. Okay. And so depending on if we're dealing with crab apples, sometimes those apples are really tiny. They're the size of cherries. Yep. That's going to be a lot of apples per bottle. On the other side of things, sometimes we've got stuff and it's just these monster fist grapefruit sized beasts. That's going to be fewer apples per pound. But each bottle probably has about 2 to 3 pounds of apples in it.
Jeez.
That's crazy.
So yeah, this is also a question. So people use wine a lot for cooking recipes. Is cider a good option for that, or are you pissing in the wind?
It's a phenomenal option. Especially the style of cider that we do. And so when we finish a tasting room weekend and we've got some leftover bottles, it's awesome. You can braise pork in it, which is what I did literally 4 days ago. Nice big pork roast, braised in cider. It's amazing. And yeah, you can make cider vinegar. It really does have a lot of versatility, just like a wine.
Nice.
I don't know if I'd want to waste this with, I like
I like drinking it as well, but
I'm like, you have leftovers?
Yeah, what the hell kind of parties do you attend?
I had to make them put 3 bottles aside. I was like, please.
Yeah, we had to save some.
Need something to take home.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we shipped them to ourselves.
We did.
Cider definitely has a role in the kitchen, and it also a lot of what we do is fine dining pairings to try to show people that cider has a place at the table alongside a main course and various dishes, just like a fine wine.
Will do, Jeremy. Tell your dad I said hello. That's like a Mark Wahlberg chime in. Tell your mother I said hello.
So speaking of fine dining and pairing these ciders with
Holy shit.
I mean, you guys are kind of a big deal.
I wouldn't go that far, but no, we're definitely doing some fun stuff. So as of literally yesterday, we're now in 7 different Michelin-starred restaurants. We're in 1, 2, and 3-starred restaurants, which is just super, super fun for us. We get to put our cider in front of literally some of the best chefs in the world and see them play with the flavors that we've created in ways that are honestly pretty groundbreaking for cider as a category. We're trying to do interesting, really fun stuff, and it's so much fun to be able to pair that with people who are doing the same thing with their food plates.
Yeah, that's really cool. Now, so where is your cider currently in the United States? I mean, I know you guys are in California. I know you're in these restaurants, but can you get it outside of California yet?
Yes. Yeah. So you can't go to any fine dining outside California, but you can get our cider on our website.
That's historically accurate, actually.
Just California has good food.
That is it.
Let's just alienate everyone right out the gate. No, but you can go to our website. So posterityciderworks.com. And we have shipping in California and shipping outside of California, 2 different tabs. Because we're wine, essentially, a winemaker's license. We use a third-party service called Vino Shipper that handles all of the shipping logistics for when we have to cross state borders. And so people can order that way if they're outside California. You can also join our cider club, which is basically 9 bottles a year, 3 spring, 3 fall, 3 winter. We skip summer because nobody wants cider that's been sitting in a UPS truck at 110 degrees. Just pro tip there. And you'll get 10% off all purchases at that point.
That's very cool. So the cider club's on your website as well. Like that's the easiest way.
Yeah.
I almost signed up for it like 3 times.
Let's not get out of here, man. We got a lot of subscriptions, man.
I have a real problem. I almost signed up for sourdough bread the other day. Like,
Yeah, no, people do. So we also have charter memberships. So our cider club is only 9 bottles a year because we do know people have a lot of subscriptions. 9 is doable. And then we also have charter memberships. So if you love what we do, you can get one of those. And the perk with that one is basically you get 6 free tasting flights a year. So that one you can just come in, try the latest lineup, take what you like home with an extra discount, but you're not locked into any bottles coming to you.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, listen, Brendan, I really enjoyed this. We are going to discuss this with you off camera because I don't want to make you uncomfortable. No.
However, before we cut you off,
like
anything else that you want to share with the 22 people that have been here the entire time? Pretty crazy.
Yeah, no. So like, I appreciate everybody's time. It's been super fun to be here. And especially since this is more of a beer based audience, it's super fun to be able to talk about cider. We have a few that I would recommend to people who maybe your palate is more trained to beers. If you like sours, I would definitely steer you towards like our Cidre Calaveras. Number 4 is what we have right now. The Cidre Calaveras is basically this rolling series. Cidre is a Spanish style of cider that's typically going to be more sour and tart, acid forward and earthy. And I think that's a great jump off point. If you love sour beers, that's super fun. What else would I recommend? A lot of folks.
The Marriage Tree is really good. And I think it's pretty, I don't know. It's very approachable to the point of, I feel like anyone who doesn't even really like ciders would be like, oh, this is delicious because it tastes kind of oaky and it's very like mellow. I don't know. I like it. Sorry.
I would also say a lot of people have this perception that the 750 ml bottles are giants.
Right.
We're not wine. So we have lower ABVs typically, and it's really only 2 to 3 ounces more than a 22-ounce bomber that you're used to as a beer drinker. And so I think that's worth noting that, we're 8% alcohol. We're not that different from a nice big IPA or double, and it's not that much bigger.
Yeah, and that's the thing. But this is what's the ABV on this one?
8.4.
Yeah, that's a banger, man. Because normally people who drink beer really often like go to something light or they stick within that like 5 to 7.
Sure.
But man, an 8 and some change, that'll sneak up on you.
Honestly, we get we get up there with some of it. A lot of, like I was saying, a lot of these orchards that we harvest from, they get no summer irrigation. And what that means is that it's dry farmed fruit is what that's called. And that's popular with winemakers because it concentrates the flavor. It reduces the amount of water that's in that fruit. The flip side of that is that it drives up the bricks and the specific gravity. It's going to be way more sugar. So we have a couple of ciders. You're not drinking it right now, but we've got one right now that's going to be 12.6 ABV.
That's the world I live in, Brendan. I'm fine with it.
Yeah, that one's beefy. And then, this year we've got one where if it actually finishes, it looks like it might be like 14.8.
Man,
that is a bottle of wine. Well, it's
wild apples, no capitalization, no added sugars, and that's really, really fun to see what you can do with apples in the right climate.
That's amazing.
That is fun.
I love how much fun you have making cider. I feel like it really comes out in like the product.
It's my playground.
It's awesome.
Yeah, listen, Brendan, I really appreciate you being here. I agree with Tiffany 100%. I think I really get a feel for the fact that you really enjoy what you're doing. Yeah. Which sometimes you do get some people on autopilot, or you get some people who just, it's kind of my job. I had to be here. So I really appreciate A, the information, and B, just the passion you have for it. And I think it shows through on this. Which I'm about to completely bash on Untapped. I'm going to be that guy, like not a cider guy. 2 stars.
Stop it. My mother would like to say hello to Kris as well. So please,
I will pass that along.
Thank you.
I didn't. Oh, there it is. Yeah. You misspelled Kris, but congratulations.
Christina.
Yes.
But yes, the sentiment stays. But no, Brendan, thank you so much. I appreciated having this at my wedding. I felt like it was a really special part of it. So thank you for that. And then 2, thank you for being here and for this extremely like educational and super cool opportunity to hear about all this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for having me. And thanks for having us at your wedding. Like I said, it's so much fun to get included in people's special moments. Like I put so much care and time into these things. It's so awesome when it's part of a special moment for people. I love it. And next time we're out y'all's way, you gotta come by. See the tasting room. I've got
that's always my goal, man. I want to be in the tasting room. I want to be where things are made. So looking forward to it.
I'll come pick apples.
That's right. Hey, I got this shoulder. That's exactly what I'm here.
Hold on.
Very fragile. No, I'm not. I'll be fine.
All right. Well, Brendan, I'll let you get back to your night, buddy. Thank you so much again for stopping by.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, man.
Bye.
Cheers.
Awesome. Seriously.
Sometimes I just wish I knew everything, because then every now and again somebody comes on the show and they're like, by the way, this is how it works. I'm like, what the fuck is life? I don't know how anything works. Like, I think I know a lot of things, and then I don't know how anything works, and that's fine. We're running a little bit long.
Real existential moment.
Yeah, I had a real existential crisis on this show live. And that's fine, but we're going to get into this. I think the slide says beer review, but we're going to do a cider review. All right, so if you're unfamiliar with this show, this is the portion where we're going to review the beverage that we just spoke about. Normally it's a beer. Tonight it's a cider. Big night for us. Anyway, tonight we are doing Posterity Ciderworks. This one is called Marriage Tree. What else? What else do I need to say? We do this through Untapped. So if you're unfamiliar with Untapped, you can follow along with us on our Untapped. It's in the About section on the show. You can follow us individually as well as the show. But it's basically 1 to 5 bottle caps, 1 being the worst thing you've ever had, 5 being better than sex. Tiffany, you're up.
All right. So I feel like the ciders I've had in the past couple years that I can recall what they taste like. Not these ones, but I mean, we've been to Bold Rock. Like we've been to a couple different locations. I've tried a bunch of different ciders. I enjoy cider. It's a nice change from beer. I have had a few different variations now of Posterity Ciderworks, and each one of them are unique and super well balanced. And just, I don't know, I feel like it's a well-rounded cider that I can pretty much pair with any food, like depending on which one I pick. Like there's a lot here that you can do with it. And I know Brendan talked a lot about this as well. So I honestly have not had a better cider. And when I think of ciders and my rating scale is, I'm rating it against the style itself. If I haven't found a better one, that would make it a 5. So I have not found a better one. And every single one I've had from this particular cidery has been phenomenal. So I'm giving Marriage Tree a 5. And I'm
Big
okay
day.
with it. I'm fine with it.
Big day. Well, I'm coming in strong at a 3 1/4.
Stop.
No, no, I think I agree with you in the sense that historically on the show, the goal is to rate things against its true style. Because unfortunately on Untapped and other places, you get people who go, I'm not, like I joked about earlier, I'm not a cider guy, so this is crap.
Right.
Well, that's not how that works.
Well, then don't rate it.
Yeah, don't rate it.
Like you can check it in.
That's
just don't,
fine.
Because now you're just messing with the metrics.
So
fine.
similar to like we do on every show, if we're having an IPA, I've had a billion IPAs. I'm going to rate that IPA against every IPA I've ever
and
had.
even different IPA styles. So I'm going to rate a West Coast against other West Coasts.
Correct. So from a cider standpoint, I agree. This is probably the 3rd one of theirs now that we've had.
Yeah, we had 3 at the wedding. So
I didn't drink all 3 of them at the wedding, Tiffany. I was trying to remember things. Well, yeah, well, see you later. No, but I tend to agree with you. I think from a cider standpoint of the ciders that I've had, this one's phenomenal. It's really cool to hear how they go about their ciders because
it makes it taste better.
I do think it really changes the flavor profile on it in a positive way. Because if you just pick this up and drank it and you didn't know anything about it and you're unfamiliar with what a cider is, you may miss out on some of those things.
Right.
So really good. I'm completely on board with the cider to cider conversation. This is 100% a 5 for me as well.
Yeah.
I'd like to pretend that I'm not biased, but if Tiffany gave it a 5 and I don't give it a 5, like
he's gonna hear about
the couch is right over there. No, but really solid. Honestly, that's a fantastic cider.
Yeah.
And if you're unfamiliar with cider, I'd highly recommend sourcing these guys out and trying this before you go to a mass commercial cider because they are way different animals.
And maybe you won't want to drink mass produced ones.
Correct.
So I guess tread carefully.
Tread lightly, soldiers. Oh, I do love this.
Yeah.
Josh said, I know the folks at Sly Clyde. I can slide them a crisp 5.
I mean, Sly Clyde does make pretty good ciders.
Sly Clyde is a cidery in our area.
Yeah. Brendan will send you some.
Yeah. We'll send you some and you can compare apples to apples. See what I did there? All right. So again, Posterity Cider, if you haven't had them, source them out. Again, they can ship to you. You can go to their website.
PosterityCiderworks.com.
What?
Yeah.
You remembered that?
Yep.
Oh, man, that is impressive.
Steel trap.
We are going to do a show next week as well, if anybody is still interested in our product. But yeah, next week, we're actually going to take it a little bit easy. We've done this in years past. Last year, we did it for Thanksgiving. We did like a Friendsgiving. We had a bunch of people stop by the show, whether they're beer adjacent podcasts, beer podcasts,
past
beer
guests.
makers, past guests.
Right. Friends.
Yep. We're going to shoot for the same thing next week. So if you remotely know us, look out for an email. And if you don't remotely know us, but we want you to be on the show, check your Instagram direct messages.
Or message us and we will think about it.
I handle a lot of stuff. I can't be responding to DMs personally and businessly.
Businessly? That's that 8.4.
Yeah, it's super 8.4. Thank you, everybody, for stopping by. Just do us a favor again. If you're unfamiliar with the show, make sure that you share it with your friends who might like some information like this, like we had tonight. Visit the website, wishyourbeershow.com. Check us out on all our socials. Buy merch. Don't buy merch. I don't give a shit, man. I like beer.
What? I mean, it's cool if you buy merch because then we can buy a beer. Right? Yeah.
That's it. I can't keep living this lifestyle.
I mean, we were doing so well.
I know.
Yeah. I will end the stream when it's appropriate. We're supposed to keep this going for a little while.
This is normally what Phil does. We're arguing right now about when we're supposed to end the stream because normally Phil is doing it.
No, I got it.
You're not supposed to cross the streams. You can end it whenever.
We're ending it now.
Oh, okay. Well, you got to click it again. Okay.